Good morning. My name is Jason Coyle, Operations Section Chief for Southwest Area Team 1. Today is June 14th, and this is your morning operational update for the north zone of the Calf Canyon Hermits Peaks fire. So last night's infrared, we recorded the fire at 325,340 acres. That's an increase of about 5,000 acres. While I'm talking about the acreage and how we get it, a little reminder about how we get it, and then some of the challenges that we faced last night and this morning. So the acres that we report are primarily based on an infrared flight that takes place overnight. They do multiple passes over the fire, and then they map the new heat. It has to go to a person called an IRIN, an infrared interpreter, and they interpret all that data. And then they provide a product, a GIS, electronic mapping product, to our situation unit, the people that make our maps here on the fire, on both zones of the fire. And then they take that data and they validate it, and they make sure that the interpretation that the IRIN made is consistent with what they have on the ground. Some examples of stuff they need to look for is if fire burned through a bunch of grass early in the day, and then that grass was dead out by the time they flew it at night, that would still be part of the fire's perimeter, but it wouldn't necessarily show heat at night when they flew it. So they need to correct it. The other thing that can happen is that we can have technology issues. And that's what happened last night. So we got the data late, and then there's a lot of work that had to be done to interpret the data. And so when we go to the map, you'll see that I took like Crayola crayons, actually a red marker, and drew in the bottom where the perimeter had grown. I just want to let you guys know that is that's subject to change. That as they go through the rest of the interpretation of this, then they will have a better idea of exactly how much perimeter that added. And then after we know that information, we can compare the total amount of perimeter relative to the amount contained, and then we can give you a different containment number if that needs to be done. So specifically what that means is that right now the fire is 70% contained. That's what we're reporting. If you have 100 miles and we did 70 miles of containment, then that would be 70%. If the perimeter grows by 10 miles, then that 70 miles of work that's done is no longer 70%. So that's the thing that they're kind of trying to figure out, and not kind of, that they are figuring out. And then once they get that figured out, we will be able to report on accurate acreage or accurate percent containment. All right, and there's 2,252 people assigned to the incident. So before I go to the map, one thing I wanted to touch on was multiple times I've talked about our process, our daily process to validate what it is we're doing and make sure that the approach we're taking to solving a problem is the right approach. And that first thing is to appreciate the context. And the second thing is to define that problem. And the third thing is develop an approach to solving it. So one of the things that happens when it comes to appreciating the context is that we are prone to bias. And as I was sitting there getting ready to talk to y'all this morning, I was thinking about the different situations and the different alternative futures, if you will, that we have in front of us, and what some of my biases were. One of those biases that would be easy for me to demonstrate, that I'm trying not to, is called confirmation bias. So when you search for, interpret, or recall information that continues to support a priorly held belief, that's confirmation bias. So basically it's when you focus on one possibility and you ignore the alternatives. One of the possibilities that we have in front of us right now is that we're going to get wetting rain on Friday and Saturday. That's going to moderate the fire behavior finally after this. When we look at that possibility, that's favorable. It's easy to get excited about that and talk about, we're going to get rain. Rain's not here yet. Fire is here right now. And the fire moved last night about over 4.5 miles from where its perimeter was the night before, underneath those winds. And today is another red flag day. Fortunately, those winds are out of the southwest, and I'll show you why that matters. In the coming days, that wind is going to be more southerly or southeasterly. That is supposed to be accompanied with moisture. It's certainly going to be accompanied with higher relative humidities and things that tend to moderate the fire behavior in and of themselves. But it's also going to be accompanied with south and southeast winds. So when we look at the alternative futures that we're planning for, we red team our plan and we look at those alternative futures. One is that the fire stays in the wilderness, stays south of any of the areas that we've identified as barriers to prevent it from moving north towards the 518. And that with lighter winds today, we're able to use aircraft and everything else that we have at our disposal, especially the south zone, to make sure that that is accomplished. And I know they're going to make every effort to do that as is appropriate. That's one future. The other future is that the fire continues to move north within striking distance, if you will, of the 518 corridor. The worst variation of that alternative would be if fire got across the ridge that goes from North Truchas all the way around to Ripley Point. And then the third alternative is that the fire doesn't do much and then we get good rain. And so we're looking at all three of those, and they require a lot of different variables to be considered and different potentials to be prepared for. So let me go to the map, and then I will explain to you what we're doing relative to the alternative that is just popped up recently. So to orient you, this is the 518 road. There's Angostura, and then Penasco's out here. And then these are the indirect control lines, contingency lines. So a line is indirect when it's off of the fire's edge. A line is a contingency line when it's not our primary plan, but it's something we put in place to prepare for a situation that could have a negative consequence. And so that is exactly what these lines are. It's not our primary expectation that we will need to use these lines. As a matter of fact, when they were first put in, the lines were put in this way, just this piece, to prevent this fire growth from moving back around towards the Santa Barbara drainage and then to the southwest. And then we work to extend this line, and it continues to extend and ties all the way back into the Borrego fire off to the west. That was done in recognition of the potential for fire growth down there in the southern zone and for it impacting us. So that work is ongoing right now, and it's going to continue to. This dotted line with the yellow black dots going all the way around here is the big ridge that runs from North Truchas Peak, comes all the way around to Hickorita Peak, and then to Ripley Point. Where our line ends right here is where the bare rock of the ridge begins. This is considered a barrier. We don't think that fire under most conditions is going to cross over that. There are, however, multiple areas where the fuel on the southern side goes right up to saddles. So between two peaks, the low area between two peaks and a ridge is called a saddle. And then it continues that fuel up into these different drainages. And we've identified those as potential breaches. So areas where the fire could breach that line. This work today is going to continue. We're going to develop and ensure, well, not develop because we've already developed them before, but we are going to reevaluate and adjust as necessary a plan to be able to use these lines as containment lines if that becomes necessary. We don't think that that's likely, but we also prepare for a lot of things that aren't likely because that what happens sometimes is the unlikely occurs. So if we go down along the fire's edge here from the Serpent Lake trailhead all the way down to the end of the south zone, south of Enchanted Lake, everything there is holding. We don't have any concerns about fire growth in this area. There's very limited heat shown on infrared. It's been tested by the wind multiple days, and it is continued to stay in its footprint. The asterisk by that, the qualifier, if you will, is that yesterday, all over the fire, we saw smoke popping up interior where it had never popped up before. This incredibly dry air that we're dealing with right now, humidity's down and staying in the single digits for multiple hours, strong winds on it, and high temperatures is the perfect combination for any piece of latent heat that can find fuel to show itself and to start moving. So the belief is that the assumption is that this isn't going to move anywhere in here. However, the actions that we're taking is we're continuing to patrol this and monitor it, and we have resources identified to prepare to respond if there's an area that shows heat, and that's consistent with the entire fire. So let me start down here in the southern end. So late yesterday, under 50-mile-an-hour winds down to the south, this fire moved north, and then I would suspect once it got up on this ridge, it probably was able to really catch that southwesterly wind, and then it moved to the east. It was about, when I had roughed it out, it was about 4.7 miles. And then last night on the infrared, it showed that right here. Everything from this barrier south now is under an inversion. So there's a cap. It's all smoked in. But at the Elk Raws, which is further down the ridge, the remote area weather station, it's a weather station that we gain access to. It had winds at 50 miles an hour out of the southwest this morning. So that means that there's a lot of winds up high, but there's not enough wind down below there. And so the inversion is shallow. It doesn't, the lid that's holding that smoke down and kind of suppressing that fire activity doesn't go up very high in the atmosphere. The reason I'm telling you that is that means that it's likely that inversion will lift. The conditions on the ground that are suppressing the fire are likely to not carry out throughout the day. And then as that inversion lifts, fire becomes more active, there's a real potential to see this fire growing. That growth underneath the prevailing southwesterly winds isn't really a concern. It's going to continue to flank up here, meaning move sideways, not against the wind, but basically move it at right angles to the wind some, and then it will push up here. But then we'll go back into this area where there's no threat of it moving further to the northeast. However, on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the winds are going to switch around to the south and then to the southeast. So what does that mean? Well, that's supposed to be accompanied by moisture. If it's accompanied by moisture, what it means is that we'll be nervous, we'll be watching it, we'll be seeing what actions we can take to suppress it, but that it won't move much. But if the winds come and for whatever reason the fire doesn't behave as anticipated and it continues to move to the north, then we need to be prepared for that. So that was a long explanation to explain what we see as why we have that contingency line, what we see as another barrier that we have a high degree of confidence, although not complete certainty in it being effective in preventing the fire from moving north, why we don't believe that the fire is going to continue to move north at the same rate that it moved to the northeast yesterday, but how we're preparing if that eventuality isn't true. So that's the main thing that I wanted to talk to you all about. I'll just quickly go around and say that we're continuing to work on suppression repair around the rest of the fire. As I stated yesterday, the areas of green are the areas of concentrated work that's been completed, and you'll continue to see that work, the more green on the map each day. Also continuing to work on our contingency lines, and with primary emphasis on making sure that our plan for holding and for holding this line and all the actions associated with holding this line on the southern end is as good as it can be, that we've anticipated the resource needs. We've ordered ahead of time if something like that over the coming days was to become necessary, and that we're making sure that that hope is not a plan, and that we make sure that while we're being optimistic about what we can achieve, we're being pessimistic about what will occur. Thank you.